I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My eyes felt heavy, my shoulders ached, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a soft bed. The late afternoon light had begun to fade into the kind of hazy orange that hangs over Santa Clara during rush hour. I adjusted the rearview mirror and muttered to myself, "One more day down." My hands gripped the wheel tightly as cars weaved past me on Highway 101. The highway buzzed with the impatient rhythm of California drivers heading home. My thoughts drifted to the grocery list I hadn't touched, the bills stacked on my counter, and the way my body longed for rest. That's when I heard it, the screech of tires behind me. Before I could react, metal slammed into metal. My car lurched forward violently, the sound of crushing steel filling the air as the airbags exploded. The impact knocked the air out of me. My chest felt as though it had been split open. I gasped, trying to breathe, but each inhale was like knives stabbing between my ribs. A sharp, searing pain spread through my side, my vision blurred. I remember someone's voice outside the crumpled frame of my car yelling, "Hang on, help is coming!" Red and blue lights flickered through the cracks in my vision as paramedics rushed toward me. They pulled open the door, carefully guiding me out. One of them, a young man with steady hands, kept repeating, "Stay with us, you're going to be okay." I managed to whisper, "It hurts." He nodded quickly. "Broken ribs, maybe. Breathe shallow for now. We've got you." As they strapped me onto the stretcher, I tried to focus on anything but the pain. "Doctors say broken ribs hurt more than almost any injury because every breath reminds you," he added, as if giving me knowledge might ground me in the moment. He pulled my phone from my bag and asked, "Who should we call?" "My parents," I breathed. The ambulance doors closed, sealing me inside a world of flashing lights and oxygen masks. The ride to Santa Clara Valley Medical Center blurred, but the ringing of my phone cut through everything. The paramedic holding it said softly, "We dialed your folks. They'll want to know what's happening." My mind clung to the thought of my mother and father rushing down the sterile hospital halls, worried faces, maybe my dad's heavy footsteps echoing in panic. That's what parents do, right? They show up. But instead of hearing their voices, the paramedic frowned at the screen. A single text appeared. "Just pray. We're busy watching." He blinked, looked at me, unsure if he should read it aloud. I reached out with trembling fingers and saw it myself. My chest tightened in a way no broken rib could cause. "Busy watching?" I whispered. The paramedic cleared his throat. I'm sorry." I forced a bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. "That's my family." Faith over action. He glanced at me with pity, but I looked away, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance. Inside, something collapsed deeper than bones. If love was measured by presence, then mine had failed the test. The emergency room glared with fluorescent light. Machines beeped in steady rhythm as nurses checked my vitals, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nose. The pain worsened, but it was the silence that cut deeper. A doctor in blue scrubs flipped through my chart, then looked up. "Your parents are on the way, right?" I froze. My throat tightened. For a moment, I wanted to lie, to say yes, they were coming, that I wasn't abandoned, but the truth pushed through my cracked voice. They said, "Just pray." The doctor blinked, caught off guard, and exchanged a glance with the nurse beside him. The silence that followed was heavier than any diagnosis. He cleared his throat but didn't press further, just murmured, "We'll take care of you." I turned my head to the side, biting down on the inside of my cheek. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter. I was an inconvenience, a burden they didn't want to carry. Hours dragged on. Each shallow breath was torture, ribs screaming in protest. The monitor's beeping was the only constant comfort, reminding me I was still alive. Nurses adjusted IVs, paramedics passed by. Strangers showed me more care in minutes than my parents had in a lifetime. I replayed that text in my head until the words burned. Just pray. I remembered something Maya Angelou once said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. That night, I finally did. Machines whirred around me, keeping me tethered to life, while somewhere across town, my parents sat glued to their television, choosing entertainment over their daughter gasping for air. The contrast split me open more cruelly than the accident. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them one by one, letting the sterile silence remind me of the truth. Family roles shatter in an instant. Titles like mother, father, daughter, they mean nothing if love doesn't back them up. I lay still, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the black screen of my phone. My ribs ached, but the betrayal pulsed louder. For as long as I could remember, I had been the youngest, the dramatic one, the scapegoat. They called me fragile, emotional, the one who stirred conflict. And yet here I was, silent, cracked open, and still invisible to them. I had hoped, foolishly, that one day they would see my worth, that in a moment of crisis, they would finally rise above their indifference. But they had answered clearly. A daughter's suffering could be paused for a television show. As I lay in that sterile room, ribs fractured, dignity in pieces, I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was the prologue. This was only the beginning. The beeping of the monitor filled the silence of my room. I could hear the squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum, the soft rustle of curtains being pulled aside in nearby bays, the occasional announcement echoing from overhead. Yet in my corner, time felt suspended. Every inhale burned through my cracked ribs, shallow and careful, like breathing through a cage of glass. I turned on my phone, partly to distract myself, partly to feel less alone. The screen lit up my face in the dim hospital light, the harsh glow reflecting the truth I didn't want to admit. There were no messages from my parents, not one call, not one check-in, just the hollow silence of absence. Scrolling, I tapped into social media out of habit. If silence was a language, theirs was screaming. That's when I saw it. My sister Indira had just posted on Facebook and Instagram. A smiling photo filled the screen. My parents, Indira, and a few cousins crowded around our old oak dining table. Wine glasses were raised, food spread across the plates, the room bathed in warm light. The caption read, "Family night, no drama tonight." I blinked. My ribs throbbed with the weight of those words. No drama. I lay with my side taped, oxygen flowing, doctors whispering about possible complications. My body was split open from a crash, and my family's celebration caption reduced me to the absence that made their evening easier. I whispered to myself, no drama. My ribs were cracked open. If that's not drama, what is? The betrayal stung sharper than the accident itself. In America, we know that social media is curated perfection. But when the performance is your own family's happiness without you, it isn't just false, it's cruelty. I stared at my father's face in the photo, laughing with his glass raised high. My mother's hand rested on Indira's shoulder. They looked proud, united, as if the missing piece of the puzzle, that was me, made the picture finally balanced. Elie Wiesel once said, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference." That caption was indifference carved into stone. A new notification buzzed. A colleague from the hospital had posted on Facebook, "Please pray for Aisling, in the hospital tonight after a serious accident." She tagged my parents in the post. The comments began to roll in. Praying for her recovery. Sending love and strength. Stay strong. Strangers, co-workers, neighbors, they filled the page with compassion, and my parents, tagged for the world to see, stayed silent. Not a word, not even a click of acknowledgement. The contrast crushed me. Here were people who barely knew me beyond my name badge, offering support. Meanwhile, my own blood was busy clinking glasses, curating smiles for the internet. Among the dozens of likes, one stood out. Amara. She didn't comment, but she pressed that small heart. Quiet, understated. But I noticed. Sometimes it's the simplest gestures that feel like lifelines. I set the phone down on my chest. The ache in my ribs deepened, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness in my heart. I thought, it felt like I had two families, the one that ignored me and the one made of people I barely knew but who showed up. That realization was both painful and clarifying. The community was watching, seeing both realities unfold at once. They saw the celebration and the hospital plea, side by side, a mirror of truth. I picked up the phone again, staring at the family night picture. My eyes landed on my father's hand holding the wine glass, raised as though toasting to my erasure. "He could lift a glass," I muttered, "but not a finger to call me back." The words weren't born from weakness, they were sharpened by clarity. I could have commented on the post, could have exploded in anger, but I didn't. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. If there's something I've learned about Americans, especially those over 60, it's this. We value quiet strength over public whining. Shouting would make me the drama they accused me of being. Silence, though. Silence would let the truth hang in the air like smoke they couldn't wave away. So I chose not to reply, not to type, not to give them the satisfaction of a spectacle. I decided to wait, because I didn't need to ruin their party. They had already done that themselves. As I lay back against the stiff hospital pillow, my mind steadying even as my body ached, I whispered to myself, what they didn't know was that the silence I chose tonight would echo louder than their laughter. The hospital at night carried a different kind of silence. During the day, there was movement. Nurses checking charts, visitors whispering, the occasional rattle of a food cart. But when evening settled, the corridors grew hushed and every sound magnified. The steady rhythm of the monitor beside me became the only proof I wasn't alone. My ribs ached relentlessly, sharp with every inhale, as if my body itself refused to let me forget what had happened. I reached for my phone, its glow harsh against the dimness of the room. A new message popped up from my mother. "We're praying for you." My lips pressed together, unsure if I wanted to laugh or scream. At the same time, a notification appeared from Facebook. My parents live streaming a game show, smiling on the couch, laughing at the television. I stared at the contrast. "Praying?" I whispered into the emptiness. "Prayer without presence is performance." They masked neglect with gestures that sounded holy, but meant nothing. Watching their faces light up in the live stream while I lay strapped to monitors told me everything I needed to know. The hypocrisy didn't surprise me, but it triggered something deeper. My chest tightened, not from the ribs, but from memory. I was 10 when I toppled off my bike, my knees skinned, blood streaking down my shin. I had screamed for help, but when my parents came outside, they rolled their eyes. "You always make a scene," my father muttered, tossing a towel at me. My mother added, "Toughen up, Ashling. You can't cry every time you fall." I remember the sting of the peroxide as I cleaned the wound myself, tears blurring my vision. Across the yard, Indira had scraped her hand lightly on the gate. The moment she whimpered, my parents rushed to her side with bandages, soothing voices, promises of ice cream. That memory burned now, years later, sharper than the accident. My resilience wasn't chosen, it was demanded. I learned to patch my own wounds because no one else would. Indira was coddled for a scratch. I was shamed for bleeding. I closed my eyes and felt the echo of that day merge with this one. The bike, the blood, the dismissal. It wasn't a single wound. It was the script of my life. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized tonight wasn't new. It was the same story, replayed on a bigger stage. When the doctor asked if my parents were coming and I had to answer no, it was just the adult version of being told I was dramatic. Different setting, same dismissal. I thought back to school assemblies. Indira's trophies lined the shelves, our parents cheering loudly in the crowd. When it was my turn at the piano recital, they never came. If they did, they stayed in the back, eyes on their watches. "History doesn't repeat itself," Mark Twain once said, "but it often rhymes." My accident wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was another rhyme in a long poem I never wanted to memorize. Every breath through my broken ribs felt like the past breaking open again. Pain layered over pain, memory layered over memory. My anger wasn't new either. It was the same one I'd swallowed for decades, but anger can sharpen into clarity. And tonight, I understood. This wasn't one betrayal. This was the accumulation of a lifetime of erasure. I stared at the ceiling, the sterile white panels above me. The quiet hummed like a warning. but inside something shifted. If they wanted to label me the drama, then I would use silence as my weapon. I whispered into the empty room. They think silence means weakness. They have no idea. I would not beg for their love anymore. I would not chase their presence. My strategy would be observation, patience, and precision. Let them show themselves. Let their indifference echo. The stillness of the hospital mirrored my own resolve. I didn't need to shout to make the truth known. Americans admire resilience, the kind that doesn't need a spectacle. Sometimes the loudest statement is no words at all. That night, I realized silence wasn't surrender. It was the sharpest blade I had. The morning after another restless night, I was still lying in bed, my chest bound and aching. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher than usual. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air. I closed my eyes, trying to let the steady beep of the monitor lull me into calm, when I heard voices just outside my curtain. "Her parents aren't coming," one nurse whispered. The words stung like a fresh wound. I recognized Petra's voice, the nurse who had been most attentive. She didn't sound cruel, just resigned, the way medical staff sometimes talk when they've seen too much neglect. Another nurse murmured something back, too quiet to catch, but their silence afterward told me enough. I swallowed hard, the pain in my ribs flaring. Their words weren't meant for me, but they landed deeper than any diagnosis. Strangers, people paid to keep me alive, were confirming the truth I already knew. I had been abandoned. A moment later, Petra came in, her expression carefully softened. "How's the pain this morning?" she asked, adjusting my IV. I forced a half smile. "Manageable." She hesitated, her eyes dropping briefly before she met mine again. "You're strong, I can tell." I nodded, but inside I heard myself whisper, "Pity is the tax people pay when they can't offer love." Petra wasn't cruel, she was kind, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes, and I hated it. I didn't want to be pitied. I wanted to be seen. When she left, I lay back, staring at the ceiling. Humiliation had a way of burrowing into your chest, settling heavy. It was worse than pain. Anger flickered beneath it, restrained but alive, pushing against the silence I was clinging to. By midday, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it might finally be them. Instead, it was a message from a neighbor. "We heard about the accident. I hope you're not exaggerating things again." I felt my jaw tighten. Another ping followed. Another neighbor this time. "Your sister posted something last night. Said you like attention. Don't worry, we know families can be complicated." I scrolled through Indira's latest post. A picture of her drinking coffee, sunlight streaming through the window, with the caption, "Some people crave attention. We choose peace." My fingers gripped the phone so tightly I could feel the plastic flecks. Peace? They had left me broken and alone, and she was spinning it into her virtue. The comments piled beneath. "You're the strong one, Indira. Always calm in the storm. Ignore the drama. Some people never change." My breath came shallow, the ribs cutting into me, but it wasn't the accident. It was rage, the slow, bitter kind that seeps under your skin. "They're rewriting the story while I'm lying here," I whispered to myself. And it was working. Friends of the family amplified the lie. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't a victim of an accident. I was the dramatic youngest, once again painted as unstable, needy, unreliable. In America, image is currency. They were spending mine without asking, buying sympathy for themselves and security for their reputation, and I was being robbed in real time. I opened the Notes app on my phone, my fingers moving stiffly. "They think I'm too weak to fight back," I typed. "That will be their mistake." I paused, staring at the blinking cursor. The words steadied me. Warnings don't always need to be shouted. Sometimes, a closed mouth is the loudest threat. I didn't need to chase them, to shout or cry for attention. My silence was becoming something sharper, something that unsettled them without me lifting a finger. I remembered an old saying, "Revenge is a dish best served cold." It wasn't just a proverb, it was survival. I put the phone down and stared at the wall clock ticking steadily. I imagined their whispers spreading through our neighborhood, Indira's photos soaking up praise, my parents smiling in their curated world. The anger that had burned raw was cooling, transforming into something steadier. I wasn't weak. I was waiting. That evening, the hospital grew quiet again, the hallways empty but for the occasional nurse moving between rooms. The sound of a cart rolling by faded into stillness. I reached for my phone and pulled up the family night picture one more time. I zoomed in on my father's hand, the wine glass tilted in a toast. The corners of his mouth curled in laughter, oblivious, proud. I studied that image until my ribs ached from holding my breath. "If he can toast to my absence," I whispered, "then I can toast to my return." The words weren't born of weakness but of resolve. They thought they had broken me down into silence, but they had no idea what I could build in that quiet. They thought the whispers would break me, but whispers can turn into storms, and mine was coming. The sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, striping the sterile wall in pale lines of gold. It was morning, though the hours in a hospital have a way of blending into one another, making night and day indistinguishable. I shifted slightly, ribs stabbing at me with the reminder that my body was still fragile, still dependent on shallow breaths. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen came to life, bright and insistent. There they were, 65 missed calls. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from a rush of emotions crashing together. For a fleeting moment, I let myself hope. Maybe they had finally realized what they had done. Maybe guilt had pulled them to me. But then, as quickly as the thought rose, reality swept it away. Those calls weren't from last night when I needed them. They came in the hours after, when the silence of their absence had already spoken volumes. "When you need me for something, suddenly I exist," I muttered. I tapped through the log, the relentless repetition of their names scrolling down. Too little, too late. Love wasn't supposed to be transactional, an afterthought when their conscience started to itch. Family wasn't meant to remember you only when convenient. My chest hurt, not just from the crash, but from the weight of a truth I had known all along. I scrolled further and found one unread message. It was from my father. "We need you. Answer immediately." That was it. No. "Are you okay?" No. "We're sorry we weren't there." Just demand, urgency without empathy. My breath caught, ribs screaming as anger surged through me. Need. That word had always defined our relationship. They called when they needed me to cover for them, when they needed money for bills, when they needed someone to watch their house, feed their pets, lend them my car. They needed me, not because they cared about me, but because I was useful. Bitterness clawed at me, sharpening into a quiet fury. If your worth only comes when others demand it, you're not family, you're a service. And I was tired of being their unpaid one. The phone buzzed again, another incoming call, but I let it vibrate in my hand. The ache in my side deepened with each ignored ring. Later that morning, the phone finally connected. My father's voice was calm, almost bored, as though this were nothing more than a routine check-in. "You should have answered earlier," he said flatly. I swallowed hard. I was in a hospital bed, with broken ribs. There was a pause, then a sigh. We didn't want drama at the hospital. The word hit me like another fracture, splitting me open all over again. Drama. They had reframed my near death as nothing more than a performance, a nuisance, something to be avoided because it might disturb their peace. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Drama? You call nearly dying drama?" His tone didn't waver. "You know how you get? Everything turns into a scene." "We just wanted to keep things calm." I could hear my mother in the background, her voice faint but sharp. "Tell her to stop overreacting. She always does this." The words made me clench my teeth so tightly the muscles in my jaw ached. Inside, I thought, if almost dying is drama, then what counts as real to them? I wanted to scream, to let the fury I'd held back erupt and scorch them, but I stopped myself. I knew what they wanted. To twist my voice, my emotions, into the evidence they would later point to and say, "See, she's dramatic." So instead, I took a breath, shallow and painful, and let the silence stretch. Finally, I put the phone down on the table mid-conversation. The line was still open, my father's voice droning in the distance before the screen dimmed. I didn't hang up to be polite. I let them hear nothing, because nothing, sometimes, is the sharpest sound. I sat back against the pillow, ribs aching, but my mind clearer than it had been in days. Arguing would prove their point. My silence would let their words echo back to them. Sometimes not answering is the sharpest answer, I whispered to myself. For years I had begged for their love, their acknowledgement, their presence. But not anymore. I wasn't asking, I wasn't pleading, I was preparing. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about reckoning. And if they thought I would crawl back after that excuse, they didn't know me at all. The morning after the barrage of calls, I sat propped up in my hospital bed, the blinds half closed to keep out the harsh sunlight. My ribs protested even with the smallest movement, but the ache inside my chest had less to do with the accident and more to do with the silence of the people who should have been here. I was sipping the lukewarm water from my bedside cup when the door opened and Amara walked in. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee, one of them balanced carefully as she nudged the door shut with her hip. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said, offering me the steaming cup. I managed a faint smile. "You're a saint." "I'm not, but I'm here," she replied, pulling the chair closer to my bed. She studied me for a moment. "You look stronger today." "Stronger's relative," I muttered, shifting against the pillows. She set her cup on the table and leaned in, her tone softening. "There's something I need to tell you." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What now?" "It's about the house," she began, hesitating as if weighing whether to go further. "The one where your family had that big dinner the night of your crash. I checked some records. The property tax bills, they're still under your name." I blinked, the words hitting harder than I expected. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes widened at my reaction. "Wait, you didn't know. You've been paying it, quietly, for years. I thought maybe you all had an agreement." I let out a sharp laugh that sounded more like pain than humor. "An agreement? No. I thought I was helping, keeping things stable. I thought—" My voice trailed off. She leaned forward. "Aisling, they're hosting parties, dinners, building their image on a house you've been carrying. They're erasing you, even while you're holding up the foundation." The realization sat heavy. My chest tightened. I had been exploited financially while erased emotionally. Betrayed twice, once by absence, once by deceit. In America, financial betrayal within families cuts deep. Money is more than bills, it's sacrifice, it's time, it's trust. And they had spent mine freely while deleting my name from the picture. Later that afternoon, when Amara had gone, I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself from the gnawing pain in my ribs. That's when I found Indira's new album. She had titled it Family Memories. Photo after photo slid beneath my thumb. Birthdays, graduations, Sunday dinners. In every shot, Indira beamed in the center, my parents on either side, friends and relatives circling them. But I wasn't there. Not once. No trace of my recitals, no pictures of me at college, not even snapshots from holidays when I had been present. It was as if I had been surgically removed, edited out of my own history. I whispered aloud, "It's like I've been deleted." The humiliation spread hot across my skin, followed quickly by anger. Family photos in America are legacies, proof of belonging, the archive of who mattered. To be excluded is more than oversight. It's annihilation. And this wasn't accidental. It was intentional, deliberate, cruel. I stared at one photo in particular, my parents and Indira cutting a birthday cake. I had been there that day. I remembered the frosting on my plate, the candles I helped light. Yet in Indira's version, it was as though I had never existed. The pain in my ribs pulsed harder with every breath, but the real ache came from knowing they had erased me by choice. Alone again, I let the phone rest on my chest. My thoughts spiraled, not chaotically, but with a dangerous focus. They don't just forget me, I thought. They profit off me while pretending I don't exist. The dual betrayal burned, financial and emotional, tangible and symbolic. My body hurt with each breath, but anger tightened it further, compressing my lungs until fury felt physical. I opened the Notes app and began to type, each keystroke deliberate. Mortgage papers, my name, property tax, my account, family album, my erasure. The list grew, piece by piece, evidence collected like weapons being sharpened. Elvis Presley once said, "Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a time, but it ain't going away." That truth was rising now, burning through their lies. I wouldn't waste my rage on yelling. Rage fades, proof remains. That night, when the hallways were quieter, I sat back against the pillows, the glow of my phone the only light in the room. If I said it, they'd call it drama, I whispered. If I showed it, they'd call it truth. Americans don't want stories without receipts. Proof wins. My silence wasn't weakness, it was preservation. My revenge would come not in words, but in facts. I thought back to the photos, to my father's raised glass, to the house built on my sacrifice. I vowed that I would reclaim more than my finances. I would reclaim myself. This was no longer about being loved, it was about being seen. I closed my eyes, the vow settling inside me like steel. Betrayal had given way to humiliation, humiliation to bitter clarity, and clarity to defiance. If they could erase me from the photos, they forgot one thing. My name was still written on the deed. The day stretched long in the hospital, light pouring through the blinds in sharp lines. I had been sitting upright with pillows propped behind me, trying to ease the pain in my ribs, when the door opened and Amara stepped in again. She wasn't carrying just coffee this time. Her hands gripped a manila folder stuffed with papers, her expression unusually tense. "I found something," she said, closing the door carefully. My stomach tightened. "Something good or something bad?" Her hesitation told me the answer before she spoke. She set the folder on the bed tray and slid into the chair beside me. "I shouldn't be the one telling you this, but you need to know. Your name. It's not on the family will anymore." I stared at her, unblinking. "That's not possible. My father, he told me." She cut in gently. "He changed it, Aisling. I checked the records. Everything was shifted. Indira is listed. You're not." The words sliced deeper than any broken rib. I felt my throat close as the reality settled. I hadn't just been erased from pictures or ignored in emergencies. I had been written out of the law. Amara watched me carefully. "I'm sorry. I know this is," I whispered, the words barely forming. I wasn't just erased from the album. I was erased from the law. In America, fights over wills tear families apart. I had seen patients in the hospital whisper about siblings who never spoke again because of money left or withheld. And now I was another name in that unholy list. Only worse because my name wasn't there at all. Amara opened the folder again and pulled out a receipt. "And there's more." I rubbed my forehead, bracing myself. "Please, just say it." She laid down several receipts. Catering bills, grocery invoices, a wine delivery. These were tied to your credit card, the same ones from family night. I picked up one slip, my hand trembling. It showed the total for wine bottles and imported cheese. The date matched the night they toasted without me. "They toasted with wine I unknowingly bought," I muttered, my voice dry and bitter. Amara nodded sadly. "They used your money, Aisling. You were paying for the celebrations you were excluded from." The betrayal boiled hotter than before. To be called dramatic, erased from photos, written out of legal rights, and still my money had quietly funded their charade. I pressed my palm against my aching ribs, trying to steady myself. "Not only abandoned," I whispered, "exploited." Amara's eyes softened. "This happens more than people admit. You wouldn't believe the stories. Families using the responsible one until there's nothing left." Her words struck something deep in me. Many in this country knew it. Siblings fighting over inheritance, children cut out of wills, the golden child being rewarded while the quiet one carried the load. My family wasn't unique, but that didn't make it hurt less. I remembered James A. Garfield's quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." Miserable was exactly what I felt. When Amara left, I sat alone, the folder heavy in my lap. My chest rose and fell shallow, every breath dragging across broken bone and heavier truth. Money, photos, words. Every weapon they had used against me was another way to erase me. For a split second, I wanted to pick up the phone and scream at them, to shout until my voice broke, to demand why. But I knew exactly how it would play out. They'd twist it, call me unstable, dramatic once again. Instead, I powered on my phone and began methodically taking photos of the documents. Mortgage payments, tax records, receipts, the altered will, all captured and stored. Screenshots of Indira's posts, comments from neighbors, the silent evidence of my erasure. This wasn't rage anymore. It was collection. Quiet, deliberate. Proof, not performance. Americans trust receipts. Proof is everything. And I was building mine. That night, I opened my notes app and began to type, each line crisp, like carving out steps on a stone path. Phase 1, observe. Phase 2, gather. Phase 3, reveal. I stared at the words until the glow of the phone blurred my vision. This wasn't passive endurance anymore. It was strategy. My silence had transformed into warfare, the kind you fight with evidence and timing, not with raised voices. I whispered into the empty room. They wrote me out, but they forgot. I can write myself back in. They thought they had erased me on paper, but paper burns, and I was ready to strike the match. The evening air carried a strange weight as I stood at the edge of my parents' backyard. Strings of lights hung across the trees, casting a golden glow over tables lined with catered food and rows of neighbors laughing with glasses in hand. Music floated from a speaker near the porch, mixing with the chatter of people who thought they knew our family. The scene was polished, perfect, everything carefully arranged to say, "Here lives a respectable family, thriving together." But standing in the shadows, I knew it was theater. This wasn't family, this was performance. And I was their ghost, walking silently into a play where I had been written out of the script. I adjusted my coat against the chill, each breath reminding me of the ribs still mending inside me. My eyes scanned the crowd, the people clapping each other on the back, laughing like the world outside these fences didn't exist. Nobody looked toward the quiet corner where I stood, and I was glad. Being invisible gave me space to watch. Humiliation burned in my stomach, but beneath it was anticipation, something sharper. It wasn't long before my father, Rowan, clinked his glass and called for attention. The laughter hushed, heads turning toward the patio where he and my mother stood beside Indira. My sister's smile was radiant, a polished thing she'd practiced for years. Rowan raised his voice, steady and proud. "Tonight, we honor the true pillar of this family, the homeowner, the woman who holds us together, our Indira." Applause erupted. Guests cheered, glasses lifted. Indira tilted her chin with that perfect mix of modesty and pride, soaking in the lie like sunlight. My mother placed a hand on her shoulder, beaming for the crowd. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. Every clap felt like a hammer against my chest. That house, the mortgage, the taxes, had my name inked on the documents. They were standing under my roof and handing it to her like a trophy. Inside, I whispered, they handed her my roof and applauded her for standing under it. In this country, owning a home isn't just property, it's identity. It's proof you've made it, proof you belong. And in that moment, they killed my existence in front of a crowd that celebrated my erasure. I stayed silent, but rage burned cold in my veins, sharp and patient. Later in the evening, children darted between tables with plates of cake, their laughter cutting through the music. Indira's daughter, Ilara, tugged on her mother's sleeve, then toddled toward me before anyone could stop her. Her eyes, wide and innocent, looked up at me with confusion. "Auntie," she asked loudly, "why aren't you in the family photo?" The question sliced the air. Conversations faltered, glasses paused halfway to lips. For a breathless moment, the only sound was the crackle of the patio lights. Indira's laugh came too quickly, brittle around the edges. "Oh, she's always been busy. You know your aunt." I felt the sting more sharply than my ribs ever had. To be erased is one thing. To have it voiced by a child too young to lie was another. I crouched slightly, meeting Alara's eyes. "Sometimes people are left out," I said softly, "but it doesn't mean they weren't there." The adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone coughed. Indira ushered her daughter back, smiling tightly, whispering something in her ear. But the truth had already slipped out, unfiltered, undeniable. Inside, I made a vow. Even children see the truth. Tonight, the adults will too. I noticed then that a guest near the back of the yard had their phone propped up, live streaming the party. The glowing screen faced the crowd, broadcasting the curated image of unity to dozens, maybe hundreds of people online. And then the comments began to roll across the screen. "Where's Aisling? Isn't she part of the family? Strange. I thought there were 2 daughters. Didn't she have an accident recently? Why isn't she there?" I saw Indira glance at the screen, her smile faltering for the first time. My father stiffened, his hand tightening around his glass. My mother's expression froze, her laugh suddenly hollow. The online audience, faceless but present, was pulling at the threads of their performance. The image they'd built was cracking, and no toast could cover it. I stepped forward slightly, the movement small but deliberate. Heads turned. Conversations hushed again. I didn't need to speak yet. My silence carried more weight than words. Every eye began to shift toward me. Indira's smile collapsed into something closer to panic. My parents exchanged a glance, fear flickering behind their carefully rehearsed faces. The spotlight they stole was finally finding me, and I wasn't going to waste it. I stood among the crowd, the night air buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses. Laughter spilled from groups gathered near the buffet tables, the smell of grilled meat and wine swirling through the suburban yard. On the surface, it looked like joy, but I felt the undercurrent, the false harmony my family always performed so well. I tightened my coat around me, letting the familiar ache of my ribs remind me why I was here. I wasn't a spectator anymore. I was carrying proof. My proof. The memory of sneaking back into the house days earlier flashed in my mind. I'd moved quietly through the hallway, the air heavy with the scent of my father's cologne lingering in the wood. My hands had trembled as I opened the safe, but when I pulled out the folder, the tremor stopped. Mortgage deed, bank statements, utility bills, all with my name. They thought they had hidden it, but I found it. They thought silence meant surrender, but my silence was a blade. "They thought I was erased," I whispered to myself, gripping the papers folded neatly inside my bag now. But I never left. My name was etched deeper than their denial. My chest swelled, not with pain, but with anticipation. Tonight wasn't just another performance of theirs. Tonight, I had the script. The live stream was still going, the phone propped up by a guest who wanted to share the celebration with the online world. Faces smiled into the camera, clapping along as Indira stepped forward, her hair gleaming under the string lights. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice carrying confidence. "I'm honored to be the one holding our family's legacy. This home represents stability, love, and commitment." The guests clapped warmly. My parents beamed, their faces masks of pride. Indira spread her arms as if the applause were sunlight she was meant to bask in. I stepped forward, slowly but deliberately. The scrape of my shoes against the patio stone pulled eyes toward me. Conversation dimmed, then stopped. Silence spread across the yard like a wave. I met my sister's eyes and spoke, my voice steady but cutting through the night. "Interesting speech, sister. But before we clap, let's see who really owns this place." I pulled the folded mortgage deed from my bag and held it up. The paper fluttered in the breeze, illuminated by the warm light. Gasps rippled through the guests. Rowan's glass wavered in his hand. Soraya's smile froze in place. Indira's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. I unfolded the papers slowly, deliberately. "This property," I read aloud, "was purchased under my name. The mortgage payments have been made from my account, year after year." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight was in the words. Whispers spread through the crowd. "Is she serious?" someone muttered. Another voice. "Wait, her name is on the deed?" I turned a page, holding up a bank statement. "Every bill, every tax payment, mine. While you toasted under this roof, I was the one paying to keep it standing." Indira stammered, stepping closer. "That's not how— This isn't the time, Aisling." "Oh, it's exactly the time," I replied. My tone stayed calm, but the firmness in it made her flinch. On the live stream, comments began flooding in. "She's the real owner." "They used her." "Exploited by her own family." The online audience was no longer clapping. They were judging. I closed the folder with a snap. In America, receipts speak louder than excuses, and I've brought mine. The humiliation shifted visibly from me to them. I saw it in Indira's trembling hands, in Soraya's darting eyes, in Rowan's clenched jaw. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to cry. Paper spoke for me. Rowan finally broke the silence, his voice hard and brittle. "She's exaggerating again. Always twisting things for attention." I turned to him slowly, my ribs aching as I stood taller. "The bank doesn't exaggerate. Neither does the law." Soraya reached for Indira's arm, whispering frantically. Indira attempted a nervous laugh, forcing it out like cracked glass. "Come on, everyone knows Aisling makes things sound bigger than they are." But the guests weren't smiling anymore. Their eyes no longer sparkled with admiration. They glittered with suspicion, even disdain. The shift was palpable, the judgment no longer on me but on them. The silence turned heavy, judgmental. The family image they had worked so hard to craft was collapsing live, in front of everyone, online and in person. I straightened, letting the pain in my body anchor me, not hold me back. My dignity stood taller than my broken bones. I let the folder rest at my side, meeting the eyes of the crowd, then my family. "And that," I said quietly, "was only the first piece of truth I brought with me." The papers were only the beginning. My next move would end the performance for good. The moment after I lowered the folder, the entire backyard shifted. Just seconds before, laughter had filled the air, glasses had clinked, and guests had leaned in toward Indira's every word. Now, murmurs rippled like cracks through glass. People whispered, heads tilted toward one another. Some exchanged uneasy glances. A few turned to the live stream still running, scrolling through the comments that were pouring in. Indira tried to steady herself, but her voice faltered. "She's exaggerating. It's not what it looks like." Her practiced smile quivered. She raised her hand as if to reclaim the spotlight, but the words collapsed on her tongue. For the first time, I saw her stumble not out of grace, but out of humiliation. My mother tried to step forward, her voice pitched high. "This is a family misunderstanding. You all know how siblings can be. Don't take it seriously." Rowan's voice joined hers, sharp, commanding. "She's just bitter. We handled things the best way we could. It's nothing." But no one believed them. The live stream comments were relentless. Hypocrites. "Imagine abandoning your daughter, then stealing her house. Disgraceful." Guests began to shift uncomfortably, some placing drinks down without sipping. A neighbor whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "All that talk about family values, and this?" Indira broke then. Her shoulders collapsed inward, her eyes filling with tears that smeared the carefully painted image she had worked so hard to protect. She stumbled mid-sentence and fell silent, her sobbing masked by the rustle of people stepping away. The applause had collapsed. Their image, once their currency, now shredded in front of the same audience they craved. The days that followed sealed their ruin. Neighbors who had once praised Soraya's hosting avoided her in the grocery store aisles, steering carts down other lanes. At church, Rowan reached for handshakes that weren't returned. Whispers followed them everywhere. I overheard one neighbor mutter, "Imagine abandoning your own child in the hospital. Shameful." Indira's influencer world began to unravel. She posted her usual smiling photos, but the comments turned hostile. "Where's your sister now? How dare you profit off lies?" Unfollowed. Sponsorships pulled away quietly. Her likes dwindled. As for me, I didn't feel joy in their downfall. What I felt was clarity. I thought, they had lived for appearances. Tonight, appearances buried them. In this country, reputation is its own currency. When it's spent on lies, bankruptcy is inevitable. The next morning, Petra stopped by my room and touched my arm lightly. "Admin wants to see you," she said softly, "about your records." I followed slowly, ribs still sore with each step, into the administrative office. The woman behind the desk adjusted her glasses, her voice professional but kind. "We noticed your parents are listed as your emergency contacts. Given everything, would you like to change that?" The pen felt heavy in my hand, but it was the kind of weight that promised freedom. I wrote carefully, "Amara." The clerk glanced at the name and nodded. "All right, from now on, she's the one we'll call." A hush filled me, deeper than silence. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was final. Legal proof that I had cut them off. I leaned back and thought, I was no longer their responsibility, and they were no longer my burden. "Sometimes you don't get closure," I whispered under my breath. "You get clarity." Later, back in my hospital room, I sat with the paperwork folded neatly at my side. My ribs still ached, the bruises hadn't faded, but inside me something lighter stirred. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's ink on paper, quietly severing chains. I thought of the chaos of that night, the voices raised, the crowd's shock, the live stream unraveling them in real time. And I contrasted it with the sterile calm of this moment, the quiet shuffle of papers sliding into a file. Both were decisive, but this was the one that truly freed me. I exhaled slowly, carefully, feeling the first full breath I'd taken since the crash. I thought cutting them off legally would feel like loss, but instead it felt like breathing without broken ribs. The recovery wing was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Machines hummed softly in nearby rooms, nurses spoke in hushed tones at their station, and the occasional squeak of rubber soles echoed down the polished corridor. I lay back against my pillows, ribs still aching, but my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. For the first time since the crash, there were no calls, no texts, no demands buzzing across my phone. I stared at the device on the table. The screen remained black, empty of their names. A month ago, that silence would have gutted me. Today, it filled me with something I hadn't expected: relief. For once, silence wasn't abandonment. It was peace. I whispered to myself, "They finally stopped reaching." Maybe because they know they've lost their grip. Older folks in America often talk about how solitude is not the same as loneliness. I understood now. Solitude was freedom from manipulation, from guilt disguised as love. I no longer needed their presence to validate my survival. I had done that on my own. Amara came by in the afternoon, carrying a vase of fresh lilies. She placed them on the windowsill, sunlight spilling over the petals. "This room needed something alive," she said, pulling up a chair. I smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she answered firmly. "Besides, you've carried their weight long enough. Let someone carry you for once." Her words sank deeper than she knew. My throat tightened, not from pain but from recognition. Amara wasn't bound to me by blood, yet she had been present in ways my family never was. "You know," I said slowly, "I used to think family was about obligation, about what we owe each other because of ties we didn't choose. But maybe it's about who shows up." She nodded. "Friends are the family we choose for ourselves." I laughed lightly. "Edna Buchanan said that, didn't she?" Amara shrugged. Smart woman. The room warmed with her presence. Gratitude replaced bitterness. I realized I wasn't truly alone. I had been surrounded by the wrong people, and now I had the right one beside me. A week later, I stepped outside for the first time since the crash. Each step was slow, painful, but steady. The evening sun painted the Santa Clara sky in hues of orange and red, clouds glowing like embers. I drew a careful breath, my ribs still tight, but the air felt fresher than it ever had. I paused near the hospital entrance, watching families come and go. Fathers holding daughters' hands, mothers pushing wheelchairs. For a moment, the ache threatened to rise again, but I stopped it. "Broken ribs heal slowly," I whispered, "but broken trust never fully does." That was the truth. Not all parents are protectors. Sometimes survival means becoming your own. I straightened as much as I could, pulling my coat tighter. The pain was there, yes, but it no longer ruled me. What ruled me was dignity, calm strength, the kind that comes when you reclaim what was stolen. That night, back in my room, I opened my journal. The pages smelled faintly of ink and paper, grounding me in a way screens never could. I wrote, "I release them, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom." The sentence steadied my hand. Then I opened my phone and scrolled to the family group chat. The last messages there were stale. Reminders of dinners I hadn't been invited to, jokes that excluded me, silence when I needed them. My thumb hovered for a second. Then I tapped delete. Gone. It wasn't revenge. It was liberation. I leaned back, the tension slipping from my chest. Cutting them off wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form. I was ready for a new path, one beyond their shadow. Walking away didn't mean weakness. It meant I finally chose myself. It came in the form of a text, just when I thought the silence had finally sealed the distance between us. My phone buzzed on the table, and I stared at the screen before daring to pick it up. It was from them, Rowan and Soraya. "Families fight, but blood is blood. You can't cut us off. We are still your parents. It's time you stop embarrassing us and come home." I read it twice, my ribs aching not from injury this time, but from the weight of their words. No apology, no acknowledgement of their absence at the hospital, just a demand wrapped in guilt. I whispered to myself, they never change. They never will. They don't want reconciliation. They want control back. Older friends had once told me, manipulation often wears the mask of tradition. Now I understood. It wasn't about family. It was about keeping me bound. For the first time, their words didn't pierce me. They rolled off, leaving behind clarity. The next morning, I walked into a legal office in downtown Santa Clara. The waiting area smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the hum of printers filling the quiet space. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with calm eyes, slid a set of documents across the polished desk. "This is it," she said gently. "Once you sign, they no longer have any rights, emergency, financial, or medical. No circumstance binds you to them anymore." The pen felt cold in my hand. My fingers hesitated only for a second, then pressed the ink into the paper. Each stroke was deliberate, my name sealing the choice I had already made in my heart. When I looked up, the lawyer gave a small nod. "It's done." I let out a slow breath. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was permanent, stronger than any confrontation, more final than any argument. "Sometimes letting go is the only way to win," I murmured, sliding the papers back. Walking out of that office, I felt taller. Not healed, not yet, but free. News spreads fast in suburban circles. By the end of the week, whispers circulated like wildfire. Neighbors who had once praised Rowan and Soraya now tilted their heads in pity or disdain when they passed them at the store. "That's the family who lost their daughter," I overheard one woman mutter. Indira's online empire cracked. Her smiling posts were flooded with comments. "Where's your sister now? How dare you ignore her accident?" Followers unfollowed in droves. Sponsorships vanished. The curated perfection dissolved into exposed hypocrisy. And me? I watched it all from a distance, calm. They thought I was the weak one, I reflected. But weakness doesn't end with a signature. Chains do. In America, chosen family is often stronger than blood, and older hearts know this truth best. My parents had clung to blood ties to excuse their cruelty, but ties without love are nothing more than rope meant to strangle. Now the rope was gone. That evening, I took my first long walk beyond the hospital, each step careful but steadier than before. The California sky stretched wide above me, painted with the deep orange and fading violet of sunset. My ribs still hurt, but the air tasted new. Amara walked beside me, her steps unhurried, her presence grounding. She didn't fill the silence with chatter. She didn't need to. Just being there was enough. I stopped for a moment, staring at the horizon. They wrote me out of their story, I said, my voice steady. So I wrote them out of mine. Amara smiled softly. And you're still standing? I nodded. Stronger than before. The last of the sunlight warmed my face as I breathed in carefully, ribs expanding against the ache. It didn't matter that the pain lingered. Healing wasn't supposed to be painless. What mattered was this. Their erasure hadn't ended me. It had remade me. This wasn't an ending. It was the first chapter I wrote for myself.